The ceasefire announced yesterday. Where has that left us after 6 weeks of war in the Middle East? Geopolitical analyst Dr. Geoffrey Miller joins me. Kia ora, good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon, Guyon.
Let's start with the obvious. How solid do you think this ceasefire is?
Well, J.D. Vance, the US Vice President, has called it a fragile truce. I think that's probably an understatement. I think at this point the ceasefire is hanging by a thread. That said, it is still hanging out there, and I think all sides need to work together very closely to avoid going back to that incredibly destructive war that we had for 40 days that really didn't get the world anywhere. And we need these peace talks in Islamabad that are starting on Saturday to succeed.
Okay, the big sticking point right now seems to be whether Lebanon is covered, right? And we saw massive attacks by Israel. I think 254 dead were the latest numbers that I saw. Now, Iran is saying, well, this breaches the deal. As far as I can work out, Israel and the US are saying, well, look, Lebanon is not covered. So that is the major sticking point right now, right?
Indeed. Look, the Pakistani Prime Minister said when this was announced, the ceasefire, that Lebanon was included, and that seems to have been the understanding on the part of Iran. The US seems to be walking that back now and claiming, well, Lebanon wasn't included. That said, J.D. Vance has said that that Israel is going to be limiting its attacks potentially. So there's a recognition, I think, there implicitly that Israel's attacks are unhelpful at this point on Lebanon, on Hezbollah, and that it does risk jeopardizing this overall ceasefire. I think both sides have a bargaining chip here. Iran's is very much the closure of the Strait of Hormuz and the fact that only 4 ships have gone through there over in the last 24 hours. In fact, none of them were oil tankers, apparently. They were all just dry goods carriers. And Israel's and the US effectively is continuing the war in Lebanon. But I think if both sides step back and look at this, they'll see that it's in everyone's interest to work together constructively, at least to get to these peace talks in Islamabad on Saturday. No, everything is not worked out at this point. That's why we have these peace talks, but we need the ceasefire to survive really until Saturday at the very least. So talks on this overall peace plan, this 10-point peace plan that Iran has put forward, can progress.
Would you expect Trump to try to rein in Israel here?
Well, I think that's happening via those words from J.D. Vance. They don't, I think, expect that Israel will cave and say, okay, we'll sign up to the ceasefire in Lebanon, because that would be too much of a loss of face for Benjamin Netanyahu. But Israel could pull back and you would end up with a de facto acceptance. And I think Israel may well have conducted these massive attacks overnight, as you said, 254 dead, over 100 targets, expansion to other parts of Beirut, as a sort of final barrage of fire, and knowing full well that they would probably be pulled back and constrained. I think Israel was miffed that it wasn't fully consulted when it came to the ceasefire. The reports are that really Donald Trump simply informed Israel at the last minute that this was going ahead, and they were sort of strong-armed into signing up to the overall ceasefire. You've got to remember, while there are these issues with the ceasefire, and they're big issues, the continued closure of the Strait of Hormuz and the continued attacks by Israel on Lebanon, you have the main theatre suspended. So the US and Israel have stopped their attacks on Iran. And Iran, apart from some early attacks in the morning on the Gulf states, does seem to have stopped their attacks against the Gulf states. So that main theatre is holding. The question is, can we survive for another 48 hours or so until these peace talks begin in Islamabad?
And let's say they do, and this is kind of the end of it. What has Donald Trump achieved?
Well, indeed, and you would say that there have been tactical victories in this war, and Donald Trump would say that they've heavily degraded Iran's ballistic missile and drone capabilities. They've taken out the top leadership, killed around 50 of the top leaders right at the start of the war, including the supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. But yet the strategic victories are just very thin on the ground, and the fact is that you now have another Khamenei in power, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei's son, Mustafa Khamenei, who's reported to be more hardline than his father was. The fact is that Iran still has all of its enriched uranium. It has still significant capabilities in terms of its drones and missiles. We've seen that because the attacks have continued over the last 40 days. And fundamentally, the regime is still in place and now has control of the Strait of Hormuz, and as we heard with your previous guest, is planning to toll access through the Strait of Hormuz. And before the war, it was an open international waterway. So it's difficult to see really how the United States emerges from this war as a victor, despite all the rhetoric coming from the White House. It's equally difficult to make the case that Iran has really won this war. It's heavily weakened. Thousands of lives have been lost. I think the truth is, Guyon, is that there have been many, many losers from this war all around the world and across the Middle East, and there aren't many winners to be found.